one of the reasons I'm working with goals is that for a very long time I hated goals because they were often just gamed. In any organization, you see goals can be really, really harmful. So they can lead to, well, the wrong incentives, the wrong behavior, and they can really lead to, people just being focused on the one thing and doing whatever it takes to achieve that goal. And you reach the goal, but you miss the point. So that happens so often. And therefore, OKRs never become an algorithm for any bonus calculation.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so collectively we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, changing the way this game is being played. And we are back in this podcast studio today, Tracy Allen and I, and we are so excited to introduce you to another one of our fabulous guests, another one of our favorite conscious leaders, Philipp Schett. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Philipp. He's the former head of strategy sound design at Meta, otherwise known as Facebook in her previous life, and is now the founder of Wave9, a consultancy and training company that helps large-scale organizations execute ambitious strategies with their innovative approach to pioneering large-scale OKR rollouts, tailored for the demands of complex organizations in diverse industries. He's also a DJ in his free fun time and likes to kite surf, so he's an athlete too. Obviously, so well aligned with us here at the LLP. Philipp, welcome to the show. It's so awesome to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Philipp, why don't you plug our audience into a little bit about this backstory? What inspired this mission that you went on to create Wave9?
I got frustrated with the way big organizations were run. And I think there's a better way. Like organizations, especially when they become too large, are very often like full of internal politics. They're full of silos and intransparency. They are often characterized by leaders that don't have time to really take care of their direct reports. And it's often systems that make for very frustrating experiences on the customer side, but also and especially on the employee side. And I think there's a better way to run organizations. And I'm now trying with Wave9 to do my part to create organizations that are less frustrating and much more engaging, because at the end, we are spending so much time in our work and with our colleagues that I just hope that we can make that much more enjoyable experiences.
Yeah, this is where Tracy and I first plugged into your conscious leadership, is when we started to ask you a little bit about Wave9 and the mission that you're on in and around, OKR specifically, in contrast to KPIs. Do you think that you could plug our audience into a little bit of that backstory?
Yeah, 100%. So it's important to note that OKRs by themselves don't change much, but it's not about the way you're phrasing and you're writing down your goals. But if you are doing OKRs in a conscious and intentional way, then you can actually change something in the organization. So it's less about, let's write down our goals in a different syntax, and much more about, let's think about goals in a different way, and let's set them inclusively, let's set them together with the team in a co-created way, and let's manage different. So instead of, a manager maybe being used to managing just with the delta between, you said you achieved 100, you only achieved 80, and now I'm going to punish you for this delta. That's a very classical and still very common way of managing. And it's something that's, again, can be very frustrating. So, but let me give you a quick recap of the differences between OKRs, how we implement them, and your more traditional goal setting methodologies. So the first difference, again, very, very simple, is in the syntax. So we combine a qualitative aspect, the key result, with a qualitative aspect. So the objectives. So the objectives tell us where should we go? What is our intention? And then that's in addition to the key results that tell us, okay, we are actually on the right track. Now, in most organizations, or many organizations, only set quantitative goals. And to me, that has very little soul and very little energy. Maybe that creates some clarity, but most often not even that. But it definitely, in my experience, doesn't create that energy within a group, and that feeling of, yes, this is something we should absolutely rally around. So that's a big difference. You are introducing a very qualitative part. Then KPIs are most often only visible to the specific team or the specific individual and maybe their manager who has set them. And OKRs are being made transparent across the organization. And so that's a huge shift, and it's much less, or it's much less frequent that you will see so much strong internal politics and silos if everyone's goals and everyone's OKRs are transparent. Mainly because often silos and this internal politics was based on mistrust, and transparency really is a prerequisite for trust. And so that's something that's often a very easy change. You just make it transparent in a software, or even in a spreadsheet. So it's one click. Very often you just share it with the whole organization. But it's a fundamental shift of how people think about goals. And then we are setting them on a much shorter time frame. So very often you have in organizations annual plans and annual goals. And honestly, that's just too long in almost any environment to really make anything meaningful out of that. And so in most organizations, again, it's much more recommended that you set shorter time frames. So a quarter or maybe even a month. So you should set shorter time frames for your goals, and then you iterate on them. So instead of, again, planning for a time horizon we typically have very little visibility for, you shorten that and then iterate if necessary. And then something that's, again, the syntax isn't important, but it's important that you include the team. So I'm old enough to remember times when organizations were still run by, most often white men, and those white men came once a year and said, hey, these are all goals. And so that's not a very great way to create, again, any clarity or any energy in an organization and in a team. And so instead of a small group setting goals for the whole organization, every team is being invited to set goals for themselves. And so, and that invites conflict, of course. It invites discussion, but that's not a bug, it's a feature. We want to have that. We want to have those discussions, and we want to have them in the planning timeframe, not necessarily once we realize, oh, it's the end of the year and now we didn't reach our goals, right? So you want to have them early, because then it's the time to disagree. Then it's the time to, have maybe even an argument or two. But that's again, it's a feature, not a bug of the process. Yeah, and then lastly, we are setting them cross-functionally as well. And so everyone has goals, and every team has goals almost in an organization. So you have your marketing team has their goals, sales has their goals, and product has their goals, and that's very typical. But most often that's also not very helpful, because those teams are running okay by themselves. But if you really want to create value, these teams have to collaborate, and shared OKRs can make that sharing much, much easier.
Phillips, I have a question because I find this one really fascinating because goals are one thing, and we see this a lot where we set objectives and we may have left death bodies to get there, but we're still rewarded. Ah, thank you. I got there. I made my numbers, but I just left killed a few people along the way. Don't worry about it. So I'm just curious in the OKR, kind of like how you are doing your work with, and I know you're focused on tech. Is there a measure around how and the behaviors taken while you get to your objectives, right? When you're measuring them, because that's a really important part of the culture piece of like the companies are built on, right? Is around how we create and how we achieve our objectives, not just the number, but like how we got there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
100%. One of the reasons I'm working with goals is that for a very long time I hated goals because they were often just gamed. In any organization, you see goals can be really, really harmful. So they can lead to, well, the wrong incentives, the wrong behavior, and they can really lead to, people just being focused on the one thing and doing whatever it takes to achieve that goal. And you reach the goal, but you miss the point. So that happens so often. And therefore, OKRs never become an algorithm for any bonus calculation. So we just take the number and the grade of achievement out of that calculation, and instead we are emphasizing what was the input that a person did for the OKRs and the OKR set, and maybe even OKRs from a different team. So that is more complex for sure, because an algorithm is easy, right? Oh, you achieve 70% of that number, but that doesn't really work anymore if you're asking teams to set their own goals, right? Then obviously everyone would just set the lowest bar, and if it would be an algorithm. So instead, we are looking at the behaviors and the impact someone had, and then calculate. And most often, the most important piece of a bonus isn't the individual piece anyway, but is the shared success of a team, a department, and the organization. And so that's, again, not always perfect, but the thing that we had before, where again, oh, you only have this one number and you achieve it, great, you're a hero. You didn't achieve it, well, no, you're a loser. That's just so oversimplified and so easy to game, and has so many downsides that we have to look at behavior and impact instead.
Okay, great.
I'm curious what the adoption rate is for this OKR approach versus the old school KPI approach. It's all about energizing those leaders, those teams, and thus their organizations. And that's the call to consciousness for all our leaders listening out there right now. Let's just get conscious with our energy for a second. And remember, if it's feeling really intense inside and making you want to go fast, you speed up by slowing down, right? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's what conscious leadership's all about, right? Being fully present at the helm so that you actually are not leading from your insecurities, leading from your ego, leading from your fear in these power over ways that we also heard Philipp describing in terms of some of that old school approach to management of performance. But it's all about, leadership's all about capacity, okay? So I want us to get conscious with where our energy is telling us. We need to step back from that equation and remember that the best way to get what you don't want is to fear it. So obviously, you referenced the huge mindset shift that is required here from a leader, right? And obviously the ripple effect of that being worth it in terms of the cultural shift that ensues. But what is the adoption rate that you're seeing out there?
So there's nuance to my answer. So the adoption rate by name is very, very high, meaning that many organizations adopt OKRs by name and say, hey, we are doing OKRs. We are now, well, we are now, and often enough, all they change is the syntax of their goals. So all they change, and that's very easy. We call it OKR washing. So it is something, yeah, now you had a goal before, now it's in a bit of a different syntax, it's written a bit different, and maybe you only have it for a quarter, but that's often where the change ends. And that is now very, very popular. So OKRs have become extremely popular, but still many organizations aren't being run the way we would love to see it, and we are thriving for it, which gets me to the adoption rate of what we would call true OKRs is obviously much lower, but we have now implemented at 250 to 300 organizations, and most of them, the vast majority, sticks to the model once they get to 3 OKR cycles. So that's really, really important. You have to give it some time, because if you give it up after the first time, then it's almost like you go to a gym for once and you realize, oh, this is a bit more painful, and this is a bit more work, and I still can't run a marathon. That's and then you cancel the gym membership, right? So that's the same, still happens quite often. So like many organizations are just realizing that the shift is maybe more than they wanted in the beginning, right? They were hoping for, and that's also, OKRs might be almost a bit too overhyped sometimes, because again, someone is promising everything and then without work, and that is just not true, right? There is work. In a true transformation is always work, no matter if it's a personal transformation or if it is a transformation of an organization. Always work. But if you do it a second and then a third time, then most 90-something% of organizations stick to it, or they rephrase it slightly. So we are then sometimes introducing OKRA, objectives, key results, and actions, which makes it a bit more clear that the key results should be an outcome and should be something measurable, not your task list. So there's often a second evolution into something, but most often, the adoption rate after 3 cycles is really high.
And can you just quickly describe what the difference is? You said pure OKRs, I think, was the language that you used, versus maybe just like the stock photography variety.
Yeah. So in our experience, the differences, well, depend a bit on the organization, but if you say you do OKRs, but you're still setting them the old way of, hey, a manager is coming to their team and says, these are our OKRs, then, okay, yes, you're doing OKRs. I mean, it is written in an objective and key result way, but have you achieved anything really? Like probably really not. And then if you are, and that happens still in, like, it's interesting. Of those 250 organizations, 80% roughly already had OKRs when they started working with us. So most often we get to an organization, they already do OKRs, but nothing really shifted, and therefore no improvement was seen. And now they are asking, okay, what do we actually need to do different? So really the biggest pitfall, I would say, is you don't involve the teams. So you're still in this old mindset of someone sets the goals for a larger team or a larger organization. And then the second pitfall, or the second difference, is that organizations set and forget those goals. So they set them and then they just don't look at them anymore. And so that's also something that, you're doing OKRs, but they haven't influenced any of your behavior because you aren't really looking at them. So you did all of that pain and no gain. So then really that's a very, very typical pitfall. And then OKRs are supposed to bring focus. So they are supposed to let you pick those few initiatives and few things that you actually want to focus on. Now, what often happens is that instead of a very focused objective, organizations set an objective like, we are a great team, or we have happy customers. And now that doesn't help you focus at all, because you are, yes, okay, it's an objective, but it is so broad that literally anything under the sun could fit under this objective. And so you have, again, gained nothing by this.
Requires a lot of consciousness in that leader who's trying to initiate that, if they're trying to transition their team through this type of adoption.
So 100% it requires a very conscious and intentional leader. That's correct. But what's the alternative, really, right? It's if the alternative is, don't be conscious and don't be intentional and just like set your goals, scream at the team for non-achievement and expect high outcomes, then okay, you've chosen the easier path of not being intentional, not being cautious, but you probably look at higher employee churn, lower engagement rates, and therefore, yes, it requires a bit of a new muscle, but it's still, in my opinion, a much more sustainable, much more healthy, and much more, successful way of running an organization.
Philipp, just a question, like how do you work with leaders in organizations when you're kind of showing up with them? Now, usually I assume companies or leaders that are making these decisions want your help, but I'm sure they have no idea sometimes what they're getting into when they actually get really real about doing the OKRs you're talking about, not just a surface level, right? So what are some of the qualities that you think is really important for leaders to be intentional and conscious and to really kind of adopt this? What are some of the characteristics of those leaders that really can make this a success?
Yeah. You have to, as a leader, you have to find a lot of balances in that. So very often we have leaders that come to us and have heard about OKRs and now want to buy OKRs. And then I'm always a bit like hesitant, because it's maybe they are excited about, the transparency peak is because now they want to micromanage 200 people, and that can happen, right? So it's if a leader tells me, I'm excited about OKRs because then I can finally see what Susan in our accounts payable team is really working on all day. I'm like, does that really matter? Is really what you should be focused on? So it requires to find the right balance between, yes, you now have transparency, but you can't exploit it, because then you suddenly, again, OKRs can be a weapon that can be used. And so you have to be very mindful. Then you have to find the balance between inviting discussion and running a consensus-only culture, which also is too often not very efficient and not very effective. We sometimes call this democratization of goal setting, but organizations still are in democracies in the purest form, right? You still have to sometimes make a decision. So you have to find a balance between listening for input, taking that input serious, but then still making a decision at the end of the day. And so that's a quality that we sometimes see leaders are really, really struggling with. So sometimes they were used to making now sometimes someone told them rightfully that they need to include their team, and now suddenly they are on the opposite end of the room and are just not making a decision at all anymore. And so we help them get into the right, or get into a more natural balance there. And then you have to find ways to manage performance in rightfully, right? You can't, you have to be an understanding leader. Like, yeah, it's not just about hitting the numbers or not, right? But you also still have to demand excellence from your team, right? This doesn't mean that you just now accept that someone is not putting in the work or someone is not showing up. So again, that's a balance that sometimes, yeah, requires some expertise and requires some help and maybe even some external perspective. And then of course we help just with the basics of training everyone in well, but then also how to actually use them in their day-to-day.
I'm curious if you, when you're rolling this system out with organizations, do you notice a difference in terms of the generations that you're working with in terms of leading this type of transformation? I have to imagine with the younger generations, this is something they can step right into, right? Because this is what we're seeing in the future generations coming up into the workforce, is that these are the things that they value, right? Co-creation, collaboration, trust, transparency. These are all the things that we know they're looking for, right? When they go to work. But what have your observations been cross-generationally?
There's absolutely a difference between generations and even cultures, right? You will see that OKR setting in, well, the Nordics and Scandinavia is a bit different to goal setting in the Middle East or goal setting in the US. And even in the US, you have cultural differences between the South and generations play a role. Location and culture definitely plays a role too. And I would say the generations, well, the younger generations are very often just expect this, right? If they go into an organization is not transparent, is not, well, not inclusive, right? And does only tell them what to do, that is typically, yeah, again, it's very often, it's the word is a couple of years old, but quiet quitters, right? You suddenly have those very, very quickly, and they are then looking for a new opportunity somewhere. And then we very often have, we very often have middle managers that are struggling with this a bit. And then middle managers are often a bit older in large organizations because they have already had a career, right? So there's probably some correlation between it is tougher for middle managers, and it is maybe that's why it's tougher for a bit older generation in the workplace. But and I understand that, right? You were used to, your role was you were in a room, and now you had superior knowledge to everyone else because your boss was telling you the strategy and was telling you, okay, this is where we go. And then now you were telling proudly the team the news, right? And so suddenly that it's not as valuable anymore because everyone sees the goals from the higher ups, and that transparency, like, I mean, the goal is to have less of these non-value adding tasks for a manager, for a leader, so that they can focus on much more value adding tasks. Because honestly, that was never a great use of anyone's time, right? It was a weird game of telephone. And so instead, we are breaking those chains. And now you can use your time, to collaborate with the team on actual projects. Like, I know so many middle managers that haven't really worked in their fields for time because all they were doing and all they are doing is just translating from here to there and becoming almost ticket machines. Like, okay, I get a few tasks and now I'm distributing them among the team, right? So that's not very great. But if you actually work with your team on projects, that's much more fun. If you take the time to become, well, to remove roadblocks for your team, right? And to work with your team members on their personal development plans, on their careers, and on what is important for them, then that's much more value adding than just translating something that you heard here to here.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Philipp, because you're still helping, I'm assuming, a lot of tech companies, and I'm always curious, what do you see in terms of trends in the tech world, in terms of when we talk about conscious leadership? And that it has its own kind of reputation in the tech world in terms of what that leadership looks like. And I'm curious what you think it looks like now, and do you see it trending in a much more kind of conscious way in terms of how we're changing the way we lead our people and how we care for our people, and having that vulnerability at the table and really kind of like supporting them from an upwards perspective as opposed to shooting down direction?
I've seen that definitely a couple of years ago, but very recently I see an opposite trend again, and that is something that I'm a bit anxious and honestly not, and very concerned about, because it is something that is making is putting all of those at risk. And so if you've seen, I mean, we've seen many of these tech organizations go through layoffs, and sometimes multiple rounds of layoffs. And that has created a culture in some where people aren't willing to take the risk anymore of showing or of having a discussion about those goals, or trying to use, either consciously or sometimes not very intentional, but it still happens that are sometimes using the fear of layoffs and the fear of, oh, AI is taking our jobs if we aren't moving fast, if we are creating that urgency. You see that in many, again, in some tech worlds. I mean, the news trend is 996, right? Working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on 6 days a week. And now, especially in San Francisco, that's not just one company anymore. It's many. There's statistics that show that lunchtime restaurants now have, in downtown San Francisco, suddenly have much higher revenue during Saturdays, because it's an expectation now to work more Saturdays. So again, I've seen that a couple of years ago, for sure, the trend to being a more vulnerable leader and being more inclusive. But I see at the moment, again, the opposite again, which makes me, again, sad and anxious, because I don't think it's a very healthy and sustainable way for this tech. Founder mode is another one of those trends that got popular a year ago or so, where it became modern again for a founder to be completely micromanaging. And so I get that's sometimes that feels great for a founder. Oh, I am the one that rescues this. I go deep into every topic, but how it feels for someone like a manager to be, oh no, I'm taking the steering wheel here, and just let me do this now. That's just not creating a very healthy culture. So again, I do hope that this is only a short phase, and that we will go back to a much more mindful organizations soon.
Yeah. And I think probably, Susan, you can talk about this, right? Why you think, I'm sure you have an opinion of why you think it changed and now it's back to, because it is around mindset, right? And how people are feeling as leaders, how the pressure gets really hot in some cases, if the competition is very high, if the market's not doing well, and if you haven't done the work to be able to be very honest and very clear on how you want to lead, you can get caught up in that fight flight kind of directive kind of mode, right? you want to?
Yeah. I think we've been exploring this on the show all summer, Philip, in terms of this disruption that we're all kind of in all of a sudden. You know, we just went through a pandemic and now we find ourselves in a similar state of scarcity. I definitely see that in the trenches of coaching my leaders, but I do believe that's temporal. And we've been talking about how change triggers the amygdala, you know, and it puts us into the tunnel where, yeah, we start to accelerate with that sense of urgency because of the pressure, right? And the expectation. And I obviously don't believe that that can last because we got some adapting to do. And that's why we're talking about conscious leadership. That's why you're talking about this a conscious approach to goal setting. It's why we're still talking about the importance of transparency, especially for these future generations. So my vote is that this is a natural byproduct of just the disruption everybody's experience as we're all kind of realizing that we're about to go through another huge up-leveling, you know, in terms of the future of work. But yeah, I definitely think this is something we want to have Philipp back to do a part 2 on, because this just got juicy right at the end, of course, when we're running out of time. I definitely want to check in with you, Philipp, in regards to, I know everybody listening out there is going to want to reach out and continue this conversation with you, get that, you know, OKR party started in their organization. So where would you like them to find you if they're ready to connect?
Fantastic. Yeah. And if you like to connect, you can easily find me on LinkedIn and of course on wave9.com.
Amazing. Tracy, any final words for our folks?
Well, I think it was great to hear, Philipp, your perspective on tech. I always, being in the tech world, I always love exchanging ideas around what you're seeing. And obviously in your consulting world, you're working with many. So I'm happy to hear that you did see it. And I think, you know, COVID caused us to be vulnerable. We knew there was so many trends happening in the marketplace for people that I think it pushed us to be vulnerable and much more human-centric. I think we're back to the drawing board. The cooker pressure's on and people are starting to go back to their old habits. So I think for me, it's just a call out to all those leaders out there to remember to be intentional and be very clear on how you want to lead people, because you know, at the end of the day, when we talk about OKRs and you know, objectives for our teams, the best way to get them there is by inspiration, not by directing. So, and I think, you know, Philipp, you explained a lot of that to us. So, you know, I would challenge our leaders out there to really get clear on what the impact is in the world that they want to have, and how do they want to leave their legacy for their people in terms of what they say about them, how they feel about them, because that's the challenge. We need to get back into like really caring for our people and helping them, inspire them to do the work that we need them to do to get them to the goals of the organization and the success of the companies. It's not by top-down leadership. So I would say I would challenge our leaders to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, we heard Philipp talking a lot about energy today in the context of his strategy. It's all about energizing those leaders, those teams, and thus their organizations. And that's the call to consciousness for all our leaders listening out there right now. Let's just get conscious with our energy for a second. And remember, if it's feeling really intense inside and making you want to go fast, you speed up by slowing down, right? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's what conscious leadership's all about, right? Being fully present at the helm so that you actually are not leading from your insecurities, leading from your ego, leading from your fear in these power over ways that we also heard Philipp describing in terms of some of that old school approach to management of performance. But it's all about, leadership's all about capacity, okay? So I want us to get conscious with where our energy is telling us. We need to step back from that equation and remember that the best way to get what you don't want is to fear it. And that's what's at the helm. If you're leading in these old school 1.0 command and control, micromanaging ways that are unconscious, just remember where you're going to be once this, you know, the waves stop crashing and the water settles. You're going to be washed up to shore if you don't really get conscious and pay attention to experts like these that are definitely showing us where we need to be for the future of work. I so enjoyed this conversation, Philipp. I mean it. We want to have you back for a part 2 because I really want to dig into that last piece of our discussion. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone out there for being here too. Remember, we are in the year of co-creation, and that means that we want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback on this discussion. We want to know where your vote lies in terms of that juicy landing spot. And we want to know what questions you'd like us to ask if we have Philipp back in for round 2. Please remember to hit like and subscribe on your way out this locker room door. And for all other curiosity in and around how to get really conscious in your leadership right about now, head on over to the website where you can check out all those conscious leadership offerings that we have, Elite High Performance. That's all. This has been so much fun, as it always is. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all next week.